2, 1.
Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Thank you for being with us on this Friday afternoon. We're going to be joined in just a moment by one of my dear friends and mentors, someone I've known for the majority of my life now, George Strait, former health correspondent, senior health correspondent from ABC News, who's been kind enough to take a little bit of time out of his day. We'll get to this in a moment, but we should all be wishing George a happy birthday. He turned, he had a birthday on Tuesday. I'm not going to date him because I know I'll get in trouble for that later. But this is also a tough day for George. He lost a very close family friend just overnight to COVID-19 complications from that. And we'll talk probably a little bit about that over the course of this hour. Right now, would love it, just if you've been with us before, you know this, if you would go ahead and go into the chat box, use your finger or your cursor, whatever you're using with your computer. If you go down to the bottom and hover, you should see a little button, looks like a little thought bubble or a talk bubble from a comic book. That's the chat screen. Put your name and organization that you represent and where you're located right now in that bubble, or rather in the chat box, if you would. Hey, Dale, Abby, Catherine. I'm not going to get to everybody because we have a ton of folks who joined us today. While y'all are doing that, Liz, Heather, how are you? Kelsey, Lorca, Carrie, Claire, McAllister, Meg, Jan, lots of folks with us, so welcome, and feel free to talk to one another. Over the course of this hour, my colleague Carrie Klein will be in the chat box. If George is mentioning things that are relevant to you, we will make a point of dropping links in there so you can find them. Also, feel free to just chit-chat with one another. I think that's really necessary at this moment. We are also, as we always do, making live notes on Twitter. So if you're one of those people who can manage two screens at the same time, you can go ahead and go onto Twitter. The hashtag there is ComNetLive, ComNetLive. Our colleague Gab Sarah Ferris will be making really good notes there. And you can also, if you'd like, if you've got some resources you'd like to share or you have a need, a question you'd like to ask, we have a hashtag that we've been using across the Communications for Good space, and that's called Comms for Good. So that's COMMS, the number 4. GOOD, Comms for Good. Great place to find colleagues and share information. So thanks very much for that. Why don't we go ahead and get underway? A couple things I want to share with you before we pass it to George. My colleague Tristan Mahabir is running the slides. So Tristan, if you would, let's just show you the agenda so you know you're in the right place. If you're joining us now, a couple hundred of you in here now, we are going to be talking about news and information, how we're all consuming news and information in this moment, when obviously there are developments by the hour here in the United States and even around the globe. Why don't we, Tristan, go ahead if you got a sense kind of what's ahead for you. Why don't I just give you a quick update. The WHO, it's a great band. The Straight Boys are big fans, but that's not what we're referring to here. That's the World Health Organization, has changed something, and it's something that I think you all can probably help to get the word out about. They've shifted the word, phrase that we've been using a lot, social distancing. They are now specifically guiding or offering guidance saying that let's go ahead and start calling that physical distancing, because I think it's more accurate, right? Trying to keep at least 6 feet from other people in order to ensure that we don't infect anybody or perhaps have something heading our way in the form of a pathogen. Make sure that we're really talking about it in terms of physical distancing. Obviously, we're all online together today, so hopefully we're going to be a little bit social. But the goal here is, as you are talking about and talking with your communities and the audiences that you're reaching, please start using the phrase, if you can, physical distancing. It'll make a big difference. I think it helps people really understand what we're talking about here. And George is going to talk about how important words are, ensuring that people get good, clear information. Tristan, if you want to go ahead and jump to the next one. Also want to just let you know a little bit about some context in which we're going to have this discussion today. So a recent poll out from NPR, PBS, and Marist College talking about where people are going to get information. Won't surprise you, particularly here in the United States where things are deeply polarized. I actually think that's sort of a trend around the world. But you can see here that people are getting information from President Trump, and it breaks down politically. Also the news media, and you're going to see another item. Tristan, if you'll go ahead and advance. You can find this poll, by the way, if you're looking for it. If you just Google PBS NPR Marist poll, that should just pop up for you. The Pew Research Center also doing some really tremendous work right now. If you're looking for public information or public polling information, Gallup as well, all good places to go. Gallup, Pew Research Center, and the NPR PBS Marist poll. So here is another place. This is what's really, I think, important when you see that there's just not a lot of distinction politically, which is state and local governments are great sources for information right now. Really, really important because this is an asymmetrical crisis. What it looks like in Taos, New Mexico, it's a little bit different than what it's looking like right now in New York City, as a for instance. And obviously public health experts, folks working in the medical field at Centers for Disease Control, NIH, your local health departments, the World Health Organization. These are people that you should be regularly looking to for guidance. And Carrie is throwing some of this information into the chat just now, so if you need it, go ahead and help yourself. But I think this is a really, really, really important thing for you all to look at. This is a place where we can help. This is a place where if you work at a foundation or nonprofit, we've talked a little about this idea of offering a signal boost to amplify messages coming from CDC, NIH, your local health department. A lot of you have started to do that, and if you have, just thank you very much. I think that's really critical. For those of us who believe that the word is getting out, I'd encourage you just to look at some of the news information that's coming out from around the country. This is an asymmetrical crisis. There are people in plenty of parts of the country who simply haven't got the word. Heard from a friend in Chicago just yesterday, actually a couple of our colleagues in Chicago, they had to close the lakefront because while people are out of work, businesses are shutting down, lots of people still congregating in public spaces. So that physical distancing message, really important. And having that message come from people in state and local government, particularly in the health departments and public health experts, incredibly essential. The messengers matter here. They really, really, really do. All right, Tristan, if you would, let's go to the next slide. This is also something that we saw just a couple days ago now. This is from the Cause and Social Influencing Initiative. They were talking about millennials. They did a quick poll of millennials trying to get a sense of where people were going to get information. And as you'll see, federal government, just not a lot of trust there. Young people, so this is age 40 and below now, or thereabouts, I'm getting my millennial demographic right, are looking to local government. As you can see, 20% of them trust them a lot, 37% trust them some. That's nearly 60% of millennials are looking to local government for news and information to help them stay safe. But even more strikingly, I think if you look at the number just below that, nonprofit organizations, that would include foundations and what we think of as nonprofits here in the network, 24%, that is the high watermark. Your organizations are the organizations with a tremendous amount of influence, tremendous amount of stature and good standing reputation. This is a chance to use that reputational capital to do a little bit of good. So when we talk about that signal boost, this is why, because people are looking to your organizations and trust them a lot or trust them some. Those numbers are just over the moon right there. So what you can see is 60% of Americans, which is a stunning thing. I don't think I live in a household of 4 people. I don't think I could get 60% of them to agree on what to have on our pizza on any given night. So if you would, by all means, do take that as an excuse or as a point of reference to start doing a little bit more if you're not already. And if you are, please do even more than that. It's really, really matters. The other thing we talked out of this particular poll was that for millennials who have traditionally looked at information for Facebook, Instagram, Snap and other places that I don't regularly necessarily use, traditional news media is back. And that is local news, very, very important. Local news is essential. Of course, lots of local news organizations struggling right now, but also national news media. The big challenge is how to be a good consumer of that information. A lot of us, I'm one of them, but not too many of us, are getting dead tree editions. I was struck, just wanted to show this to you. This is the cover of the New York Times. Today it was delivered to my home in Washington, D.C. I don't know if it looks exactly the same in the city, but I was really struck by this graphic that they actually use the physical space of the front page to really illustrate jobless claims, which we've all heard the news, but it struck me and struck me. This right here is actually the 2008, the height of the financial crisis then. And this is, as of last week, jobless claims in the United States. Historic number, absolutely astounding. We've never seen anything like it in history. Also, and we'll talk about this with George, getting a dead tree edition of the newspaper or going to credible organizations is a really great way to figure out what's most important, because when you're getting your news on your phone, chances are you're getting the latest information, but maybe not the most important or salient. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next hour. Tristan, if you'll go to the next slide. Now, it's my pleasure to hand it off to my dear friend. He's a member of my family. Dana and I love him, and Lisa and Kevin and Strait and the boys and the grandkids dearly, but my friend and mentor, Mr. George Strait, if you would, sir, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Sean, and just so that you know, and everybody else on the line, that Sean's a member of our family too. Has always been very special to us. I met Sean 1,000 years ago when he was at ABC News, and I was too. And I'd like to say hello to everyone who's online, and welcome. Sean has said that I was a journalist at ABC, and just to sort of put a little bit of that into context, and also to show that how maybe some of the things that some of my experiences may
Oh, George, you're breaking up on us a little bit.
Your experiences. I was a television journalist for, I guess, the 70s to 2000. After that, I became an entrepreneur, an internet entrepreneur. So I lived that life for a while, and then I went to the other side of the fence, if you will, from the journalism side to the public relations side, and ran public affairs at UC Berkeley, and then was the chief public affairs officer at one of the institutes at the NIH, and ended my career at the Food and Drug Administration. And running their information, at least I bring these remarks in this conversation, and I hope it is very much a conversation between you and I. I'll have a few things to say about the context of COVID and all the rest, but I know that you've got questions, and hopefully between Sean and I, we'll come up with some answers, things that help you in your work, help you not only get your, sometimes how difficult it is to get our bosses, our CEOs, to become part of this messaging, rather than just them doing something and saying, "Here, you guys fix it." So with that, as I sit in shelter here in Northern California, I'm really sort of struck by, no matter how much things have changed, so many things have stayed the same. Social distancing or physical distancing is really nothing new, and you probably know that intuitively, but I can remember it in a very specific way, how in the summertime when I was a kid, I used to go swimming at the local town pool, but when I was about 6 or 7, I remembered how my mother used to stop me from going to the town pool because she was concerned that I would catch polio. So physical social distancing was very much a part of the prevention strategy during the polio epidemics. But these public health disasters, in my experience, and your experience probably as well, they really can spark big change in both science and in social behavior. In polio, the science change was really about how one went after vaccines and made them and got them to everyone. But I think the big bombshell, if you think about it, is really HIV. HIV, I think, in many ways connected social behavior to transmission in a very intimate way, and I don't need to be any more explicit than that. Socially, I think it ultimately showed, after a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, but it ultimately showed that love is universal, no matter the object of that love. Science, it was also because fundamentally it forced researchers to look up from their microscopes and both see and recognize and give agency to the people that they were ultimately trying to help. Science for so many scientists during that time became about people and not just their own colleagues or research papers. And also government changed in so many ways. They began to embrace a more patient-centric regulatory posture. The whole idea of compassionate use, getting treatments to people before they had jumped through all, was spurred on by the folks who were living with HIV. And I'm back online. Was I offline for a little bit?
Yeah, George, we lost you for a second. Some recommendations we're getting from some of our colleagues who've been on Zoom quite a lot over the last couple of days is maybe if you turn off your video for now, your audio will come through a little bit cleaner. And I'll do the same so that your voice comes through in case I'm the cause of the problem.
Now you're asking me to turn off video, and I'm not certain I stop video. There we go. Okay.
And we can still hear you, so that's great.
Okay, good. So I don't know what you missed, but I was talking about is the government during the AIDS crisis also was forced to change in how they viewed their regulatory posture, and the whole idea of compassionate use for medications and therapies took hold. primarily because of the actions of folks who are actually living with HIV and AIDS. But in many ways, for the news media, I think that during and after HIV, as the news media began to think strategically and honestly, frankly, about how one disseminates information about public health disasters, public health epidemics, is that sort of a simple equation came to fore, and that is that plain language and honesty are really the antidotes to confusion and fear. I mean, if you think about it, the first big fears in any public health emergency is how does it spread and will I get it? And too often in describing these situations, and also in sort of making up for the fact that so many in the news media are not scientific experts, you use euphemisms. And again, I'll go back to HIV just for a second. HIV was said to be spread by close personal contact. Well, what the hell does that mean? It was a euphemism that we were forced to use because, frankly, the way that AIDS is spread is by intimate contact. And again, during those times, it was difficult to get newspapers and television stations and all the rest to be exact, to be declarative, to be specific about how you get HIV. And I remember fighting with my editors, saying, you know, we need to be specific, because if we're not, then it only breeds more confusion and fear. And so I was not having, frankly, I was not. So I found a young researcher in the mid 80s at the NIH who seemed to talk in ways that made some sense, and you could understand him, and he wasn't caught up in scientific jargon. And I asked Tony Fauci, I said, look, you need to explain to America how people actually get HIV. And for the first time, very explicit language was used on an American network, because Tony and I had developed a relationship where he felt comfortable with me and I felt comfortable with him, and he understood the kinds of things that it needed to address their fears. So that's how I met Tony back then in 1984 and 85, and of course now he's become a superstar. I had nothing to do with that. I just was actually quite honored to be able to introduce him to America, at least on television, and he has taken it to heart. COVID-19, if we get to the present, has once again, I think, a virus has assaulted our human hubris. I can remember back in the HIV days, scientists just saying, you know, how come we can't solve a problem that's caused by something that's only got three genetic pairs to it? It's so small, seems so insignificant. Well, the same thing with COVID-19, only has 4 genetic pairs. So it's so small, but yet it has stumped us and caused all of these kinds of ramifications that we currently see. So we have a certain human hubris about being able to take care of our own environment and be masters of it. But once again, the virus has shown that we are only human. Also, in a much broader sense, and I think in some ways a more serious sense, COVID-19 has laid bare years of decision-making about where we have undervalued public health, where we have too much, I think, seen public health not as a public resource, but instead a profit center. And also the media, as a result, the COVID-19 has laid bare the fact that the media has disinvested, if that's a word, in experts. And experts in public health. It's very, very rare to see a journalist who is also an expert in public health or science. And that makes it, frankly, difficult for us to do our job. It's tough to hold experts accountable when you're not sure of what they're talking about. The whole idea of risk communication is in part a discussion of absolute and relative risk. Well, if you don't know that, then either you will misinterpret what somebody has told you, or somebody will tell you something and try to get a point of view across that is actually not accurate, but you don't know because you just don't know that simple concept. The last point, though, is both a challenge, I think, and also an opportunity. A few years back, I had the honor of chairing the board of the Kaiser Family Foundation, and we had extensive investments in South Africa. What we were trying to do was to help them transform their public health system in the face of the HIV epidemic. But the problem that we had was that not too many people in South Africa were very interested in public health issues. Nelson Mandela was still in jail, and public health was not top of mind. So what we at Kaiser did is we adopted a journalist. We got a number of journalists together. We showed them that covering stories about public health was really about covering the political struggle in South Africa. And what we did is we paid their salary. We didn't edit their copy. We didn't tell them what to report or anything like that. All we asked was that, would you please cover public health? So we, in effect, adopted a number of journalists in South Africa, and as the foundation was able to amplify our message about public health by using the media, but also the media was able to take advantage of the fact that we were there, and that we showed them a different way to reach their readers, which is what they wanted to do anyway. So it was a mutual partnership that worked both for us and for them, and it's frankly a partnership that I think everybody on the phone who was in this kind of business can use as a model. Now, when I was at ABC and later in the federal government, we identified a number of public health experts on various issues, and we coached them and we found ways for them to amplify our message. So in effect, what we did is we adopted a public health expert. And a couple of the things that we were able to do with them is first to let them understand what their roles are in delivering these messages, but also to teach them some very specific little things that everybody on the phone knows, but not folks who are not communicators don't necessarily know. And that's the value of being brief. When I was at ABC, and any television story, the number of pages that you use is probably about a page and a half. That's 90 seconds, and getting people to be able to make their points quickly and cogently and in ways that tell a story, but tell a story briefly is the easiest and the best way to communicate. But I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but it's important information as you approach public health experts who want to communicate better. It's a different mindset for them and a different skill set for them, but it's one that you should be able to use because you know it so well. I guess basically what I'm saying is that you can build your own Tony Fauci in your context. There are local health departments with people who are good communicators or potentially can be good communicators if you will only reach out to them and begin to understand where each other come from and the messages that each of you think are important to deliver. So finally, before we get to a good conversation, it's sort of two things. If the more that you reach out to public health experts in your area and also journalists in your area, the easier it will be for you to hone your own messages, but also to integrate your CEOs, your COOs, the folks that you report to integrate them into this whole idea of communicating the things that your organization think are important, because it gives them a point of reference that is different from you, but is aligned with you, and it's something else that you bring to the table to encourage them to be real partners in this communication effort. The second thing that, as I close with that, I'd like to, I guess, talk a little bit about, and one that you can expect an old journalist to criticize, or at least the current journalism. Let me tell you what I think is going on in the media today around COVID-19 and these kinds of stories. I think my overall critique is that they're doing about the best that they can, given the resources that they have. Very few news organizations have health experts who are journalists. Not the big ones, and definitely not the small ones. I mean, in local news, they're having such a difficult time just getting on the air. The economics of the news media are such that you just don't have the kinds of experts that you used to. So the stories that you see, the stories that you read, these journalists are basically doing, I think, as good as they can. But the result really is, especially on a national level, is that we get stories that are covered like most of the other stories that are covered nationally, and that's, we get the political story. You don't get the public health story. You don't get the science story. You get the political story, because those are the people that the news media values, because those are the people that they hire to cover the news. So instead of hearing about things that you can actually use, what you ultimately get is, in the public, I think they hear about the political back and forth of any specific incident. They hear the blame game. And it all gets integrated into this political lens that everybody is so infatuated with, and that's really too bad, because I think what our readers, what our viewers, what the public really wants, they want answers to the basic questions. Will I get this virus? Will my kids get it? How do I protect them? And when will, again, be safe outside? So I guess my overall reaction to what I think are facts, that you get a political lens around a story where people just want basic information, is, I'm not angry about it. I guess it just makes me sad. With that uplifting note, I'd love to hear your questions and have a good conversation about some of these issues that are in front of us, but also issues that I think that, especially the folks on the line, folks are uniquely situated to being able to address and frankly conquer. I'll turn my video back on.
All right, thanks everybody. George, thank you so much. If you would, everybody, put some questions into the Q&A box. I see we have a brave soul who has done just that. Liz asked the question, George and I were actually trading notes about this last night. Liz asks, what do you think about the campaign to discredit experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci that's starting to happen now, George?
Well, it's part of this last point that I made. We
George,
have become.
I'm sorry, but your video is still, I think.
So.
Hey, George.
Independent. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if you turn off your video, we're going to be able to hear you better.
Okay, sure.
For whatever reason, I think in the Bay Area, y'all are having a tough time getting good connections.
So what has happened with Tony Fauci is what happens to all of these kinds of stories that aren't necessarily political stories, but they become political stories. It's my last point, that the people who cover these issues and are basically political reporters. You get Peter Baker on the front page of the New York Times, and not Don McNeil, who's the sole surviving health journalist at the New York Times. And because everything becomes so politicized, it's very easy then to move to, well, Tony Fauci doesn't fit my view of what is right politically, so therefore I can use that political lens to try to discredit his public health message. So the public health message gets lost in the politics of the moment. That's where we are as a country, and there's little in the media to change that, because the media views these stories too much, I think, from a political lens. So that's what happens. It's, Tony has become a friend, And I've known him since 1984, know his kids and all the rest. And I know that this hurts him. But also, you know, Tony is 79 years old. This is far from his first rodeo, and there's nothing that no one can do anything to him. He can't be fired. And I'm sure if he didn't have to go to another White House briefing, that would be fine with him.
So the follow-up question from Liz is there anything in organization, foundations and nonprofits in particular, so with your experience maybe at Kaiser, what can foundations and nonprofits be doing to help to counteract some of the messages that are going out there from fringe media sources?
It seems to me that it's going to take an awful lot of proactivity on your part to find the public health experts in your area, find the journalists in your area who are amenable and capable of telling the stories and answering the questions that people really want answered. And the more you do that, the more you're able to, you won't completely drown it out, but at least instead of having the political discussion dominate the way it dominates now, to have it less dominant. And it's about setting some expectations for yourself. You're not going to be able to overcome all of the noise because there are so many noise makers. But it's about becoming a trusted source of information. Frankly, it took the Kaiser Family Foundation about 8 years to become the trusted source of nonpartisan information that it currently is. So if you think you're going to do it in a couple of months, it's not going to happen. But it takes sustained effort. It takes sustained support from your CEO and the COOs. But it takes obviously a commitment of your board of directors. But it is working it every day. It's one little block every day. You're going to fail sometimes, but you're going to succeed sometimes. But it's about keeping at it.
Our friend Ellen asked, George, who in corporate media do you think is doing the best job right now of covering the COVID-19 pandemic here in the United States or around the globe? Is there any go-to source that you use every day that you think is particularly reliable?
You know, one of the things that I view every day is Sky News, and I also read the London newspapers. I've been watching Sky for a long time. I mean, in part they're funny, but the way they talk, the way they write can seem sensational, but they have this remarkable way of getting to stories quickly and in ways that are compelling. So I give them a lot of credit. I think, frankly, despite the criticism that and the shot that I took at Peter Baker, and I don't mean to do that really, the Times and the Post have done remarkable jobs. I think the issues that I have with both of them is so much of their coverage is about Donald Trump. That in the stories that they write about Donald Trump, it's difficult for me to see them as nonpartisans, as just sort of telling the world what they see, and I think that frankly hurts them. I don't think that any individual reporter necessarily has an axe to grind one way or the other. They just sort of tell the facts as they see them. But it's about what facts do they seek to tell. Frankly, I think the early stories of tension between Donald Trump and Tony Fauci, while maybe true, I often wondered, is that a news story? And what's the point of it? What's the public health impact of it? And I don't know that any of the corporate media folks, because Donald Trump sells newspapers and gets clicks, I'm not certain that they necessarily take a step back and say, you know, if we do this, it could have this effect. It's a discussion that journalists don't like to admit that they have, but they do. And I'm not certain that the big corporate media are having as many of those discussions as they might.
Yeah, just to sort of echo that point, I think the other thing, George and I had talked about this before we came on over the last couple of days, is the way, literally the means in which we're consuming, whether it's the Times or the Post or some of these very, very reliable and well-respected news organizations. If you're looking at the Times or the Post on your phone or an iPad, chances are you're probably seeing the feed that's loading when you load the front page of the New York Times. And my recollection is, unless they've changed this in the last hour, is that whatever the latest development is the headline. That may not be the most important thing, right? That's the one challenge I think you see with digital media, is that it has no new news judgment, right? Everything is the latest thing. It doesn't necessarily work. Like I showed this newspaper today. Well, if you've been to the Times or if you worked in any news organization, you know there's a meeting that goes into actually deciding what's the most important news, and then less important goes inside. And it actually functions just that way. The challenge in a digital environment, this is true with your screens, it's certainly true with the Times and the Post in their digital form, is what's new is what you get first. And so, George, I know you had this experience when you could talk to people going back a couple decades now. This is what the AP Newswire was. Everything that came across the wire wasn't necessarily worthy of attention or got onto the evening news, but you needed that. So how, when you were working in a newsroom, how did you think about the AP Newswire? Because I think that's probably a pretty good analog to what a lot of people are seeing now, whether that's on their social feeds or whether that's on some news organizations that they trust and like, but they're seeing them digitally.
There used to be a big party in DC where correspondents brought famous people. And I guess it's back on this Correspondents Association, which you were supposed to bring to these dinners was your main source. And I can remember the bureau chief for CBS News used to bring the chief Washington correspondent of AP, because that was his number one source. And the AP, it's not that way anymore, but when we were there, the AP was the number one source of information. But we all knew that it hadn't necessarily been filtered. And so it's not that we necessarily thought that it was the end all, but it was the beginning of it. And that gets me back to the point of having someone in with a scientific background to be able to put filters around whether it's something that comes across Twitter or the AP Newswire, so that they can determine whether or not what is there is worth investigating, is worth reporting as is. When I was at ABC, I would guess that my number one job was to tell my bosses what they read on the AP was not worth it, because the AP would report that some scientist somewhere had found a cure for cancer. Well, what they had found was that some drug in a petri dish killed a couple of cancer cells, or that some drug given to some rat had caused the tumor to shrink. And because it was my responsibility, frankly, to let my bosses, I was the expert, so I would let my bosses know whether or not this was a story to pursue or not. But there aren't enough folks in newsrooms now who have that kind of expertise. And the folks on the phone, that's where you can step in, frankly. Bringing that kind of expertise, bringing that kind of access to the media and to the people who pay attention to what you write for your nonprofits, that is invaluable. You are able to fill part of a vacuum that exists, especially in corporate media, and that vacuum will continue. COVID-19 or not, after this is over, the New York Times is not going to go out and hire 10 health journalists, and neither is WMAL in Washington, D.C. It's just not going to happen. But you all are, frankly, quite critical to filling that vacuum. And it's not so much that you have a responsibility, but you clearly do have an opportunity to do it. And also that may in some way expand your portfolio and therefore your ability to serve the folks that you work with.
All right, question from our friend Nick, who asked, George, what's the best thing a health foundation, so like Kaiser, can do to spread the right news without appearing to take political sides? How do you dance around that when everything is political these days?
It's just one word: data. I mean, data is non-political, and if you just report the data, and you're known for that, then you will do the service that you think is important, and the service that your foundation has been set up to provide. You're doing your foundation's work by finding the data, making sure that the data that you have comes from, if it's not your source, it sources that don't have an axe to grind. But just reporting that. That's why. I mean, it's not just Kaiser, but Commonwealth and others as well. That's why they have become so successful, because anybody going to it knows that the data is real, knows that the data has not been manipulated for a political purpose, knows that they can trust it. And again, as I said, it takes years to develop that trust, but it's an opportunity.
Yeah, and just to sort of build on top of that, as we said at the outset, foundations and nonprofit social sector organizations are among the most respected and trusted institutions in our society. That has been true for a while, but it's especially true at this moment. And so if you are able to lend your voice, literally, or just offer your voice, your channels, to amplify messages from credible health sources, that's the CDC, World Health Organization, NIH, and others, your local health department, incredibly important where you live, that's going to do a tremendous amount of good. Because you just never know these days with all these different vectors of information coming at us. You just never know where someone's going to go to find that information that may end up saving their life. Go ahead, George. Sorry. All right, I think we lost him there for a quick second. Hopefully, you're back, George? I think I hear you.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got me?
Gotcha. Yep.
Local health departments are populated by folks who have masters in public health, and as opposed to folks who have MDs and PhDs in theoretical physics, masters in public health are really good communicators for the most part, because that's part of their training. It's public health, and they realize that they have a responsibility and also an ability to communicate sometimes very complex and controversial subjects to the public, but they don't necessarily know how to get out there and do it. And that's where you can help them. You can adopt them, as I said earlier, and get them connected to ways that help them disseminate the public information that they think is important, but also disseminate it in an effective way. And that's part of your expertise and some of the things that you can bring to the table to help the dissemination of these messages.
Okay, now a question from our friend Catherine, who says, I agree with the point that the media are going to skills that they have, which is in particular focused around politics, political analysis, in the absence of public health knowledge. Now, wondering if you'd agree that the same thing is happening in explaining the story behind problems with supply chains, manufacturing, and logistics. We're seeing a lot of coverage of individual needs. So a doctor or clinician saying, I don't have a mask in my hospital in this location. But we're seeing little explanation of how supply chain and logistics for key healthcare supplies has failed. We don't necessarily understand what's happening upstream. Is that also an issue there, George? And how would you address that?
Exactly. I haven't seen Jeff Bezos be interviewed on any of these things. He seems to be Mr. Supply Chain. And after this, I mean, somebody asked a question. Jeff Bezos, in this whole issue, may become the most powerful person in America. But it gets to a point that I tried to make earlier, and that is our disinvestment in public health. And that's not just not having enough doctors and nurses or ventilators, but it's a whole system, and that system includes, well, if you need 10,000 respirators, well, who's going to make them, and where are those parts going to come from, and how are they going to get to people who need them? And I'm a for-profit hospital. Do I really want to buy these things that are really expensive and hold them just in case I need them? Is that a good investment for my shareholders? How are those decisions made? So supply chain is just a link in this whole chain of events that that if you think of a circle that makes public health, and we haven't invested in an awful lot of those links, and I think COVID has laid bare the lack of investment and its results. I don't know that doesn't really answer your question. How do we do something about that? It's really finding someone in your locality or in your region that is involved in this kind of work, and telling the story of that person or that company as they try to do what is possible, and the hurdles that they encounter to make that happen, both political and physical and economic, all of those hurdles.
Yeah, I think the one sort of yes and on top of that I would offer is that right now, if you're looking for guidance, good guidance that's measured and thoughtful and built on some experience, the reporters you ought to be covering, looking to, are people who have background in health and medicine, as George does, and on the supply chain front and business broadly, the economy, because obviously that's a massive issue, is looking to economic reporters. There's a lot of good ones. Kai Ryssdal is just fantastic as an example. A couple more questions in the time we have remaining. One question coming in, George: what's the best way to balance providing information, updates on COVID-19 to the audience, and this audience is specifically young adults, without adding to their stress and anxiety? I think that's something we're all worried about, is the mental health of everybody who's not infected but is affected.
It's all about nouns versus adjectives, really. If you care about this issue, and I think that you should, then the messages that you write, the messages that you deliver, there are more nouns and verbs and fewer adjectives and adverbs. Then what's most likely to happen is that people will hear what they need to hear in a sober and see, I wonder if sober is the right word, but in a way that doesn't increase the anxiety. And obviously, what I'm talking about is if you hype it with a lot of adjectives and adverbs, then you will lose your message, because what people will take in is the hype rather than what you intend. So in your writing, not only do I subscribe to the whole idea that we need to be brief, I also subscribe to the idea that the fewer adjectives and adverbs that you use, the more nouns and verbs, the more likely you are to be successful.
Okay. Nicole asked a question related to this, which is, George, do you have any advice for finding the balance between publishing content? Nicole doesn't want to be opportunistic and force connections to her organization's work, which is focused on ocean conservation. But she also doesn't want to be tone deaf and push out some previously planned content. So she's trying to navigate this new landscape with sensitivity. What do you advise her to do?
You know, it's really difficult when the whole world is focused on just one thing, but your job is to get messages out there that aren't necessarily about that. I mean, you can't say, well, I'm going to take the next month off and not do anything. But I'm certain that you are creative and can find the one or two, be they reporters or whoever would be interested in this conversation, and get them on the phone and say, look, I know that it's all hands on deck on COVID, but COVID is going to die down, and in a few weeks you're going to be looking for other things to cover, and in other ways. Let me just give you a suggestion. It's not a hard push. It's I'm going to be here for you no matter what. But I recognize what you have to do now. But remember, in X days, you're going to need this other story, and this is one that I think your readers, your viewers will like. And here's my name. Here's my contact information. And I will be in touch with you again a little bit later as COVID dies down, just to remind you that there's some other things for you to cover. And when I was a reporter in the midst of all this, I actually liked those kinds of conversations, because it took it away from somebody trying to sell me something to somebody who actually understands my business and wants to help me do it better.
Yeah, my yes and to that, Nicole, would be, I think, insofar as you can be agile and nimble, I think one thing that we could all just take as a good lesson for those of us in the communications business is the beginning of communication is not talking, it's listening. And so to the extent that you can find opportunities to, rather than publish, to invite people to share with you how in your community, the people that you serve, your donors, other people who are deeply engaged with your organization, and listen to them. Maybe the question is, how is COVID-19 impacting you? What are you thinking about? Just knowing that and sharing that out with the community in the way that we've been gathering everybody over the last couple of weeks, I think is invaluable. It's not necessarily that you're going to give them that aha piece of information, but just giving them the space to talk and learn. Cross-pollination is a great way for people to gather information and to synthesize new ideas. So actually one of the great values may be, you may not know the answer. How does ocean conservation have anything to do with COVID-19? But people, if you ask them, they might just tell you. So that's something to maybe think about.
Hold on, on that point for a bit, Sean. Professional relationships are complex and usually take a lot of trial and error to develop. And what Sean and I are talking about is really, I think, figuring out how to develop that kind of professional relationship that sometimes is personal, but most times it's just professional, so that each side understands what each other's needs are. And as Sean said, sometimes it's just listening. Sometimes it's being proactive. But this kind of relationship building ultimately serves each party. The reporter who wants to report on whatever, and you who represent a way of thinking and a whole different constituency. You want that message out too. So figuring out the best way to handle all of these professional relationships, I think, is key to ultimately serving your goals.
Okay, now we have a question coming in from our friend Cindy, and it's also a question that Kimberly wanted to ask. So let's see if we can get to this. George, how much information is too much? I work for a nonprofit that supports our community with grants and updates to our coronavirus relief funds. It's wonderful you all are doing that. Congratulations on being so swift and nimble. How often do you suggest that I send out updates when people are being inundated with information right now? Well, how much is too much? What's a good pace of information flow?
It seems to me that it's not about the amount of information, but it's the quality of it, and not, you know, especially when I was at the worked for the government, and we had something to push out, you know, seemed like every 30 seconds, but we didn't do it because especially reporters, they get so inundated and it becomes noise to them. And the people that you send information to, whether it be they reporters or other folks who depend upon your foundation, they need to know that what you are sending them is important and that you view it as important. So it can't be every 30 seconds because the information that you don't have important stuff every 30 seconds or even every day. So there's a whole rhythm to this that you have to establish with the folks who you're trying to reach, so that they know that when they see your logo or your name, that this is something important. It's not just some crazy thing that has come off of the wire that you think that they ought to have just to get your name out there. It's not so much your name that's important, but it's your name associated with information that is valuable and trusted.
Yeah, I'll just tell you the decision tree we use at the network when we're sending you all stuff is, we don't send it to you unless we think it passes this bar. Is it helpful? Is it useful? If it's those two things, then we will share it because we think we understand enough about where y'all are coming from. If it's helpful and useful, then we think it's probably something. You may not have time for it, but you'll come back to it and say, oh, that was helpful, that was useful. If it doesn't pass that smell test, chances are it's not a message you need to be sending. The other thing in terms of information flow right now, we've said this on a couple of other webinars probably to be mindful about, is not everybody has gotten the message yet. You may be working from home. Many in your organization may have radically shifted the way they've worked over the last couple of days in light of maybe your state is doing, has put out some mandates, or your city's put out some mandates in terms of what businesses can be open and people need to be working from home, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of folks who have not gotten that message. So I sort of liken this to like an ambulance coming up behind you when you're driving. If you hear a siren behind you, you oftentimes will do the reasonable, common, good thing, which is you just pull over to the side. And so with some of your messages, maybe that's really the key thing to be thinking about is if it's not going to help somebody and it's not essential, unless it's going to a very narrow audience, maybe people you work with, people you work directly for, chances are some of those broader messages, maybe they should get out of the way so that ambulance can come flying by and get through and get to the people who most need that information. A couple more questions here, George, in the time we have remaining. Do you think, oh, this is a good one. And I'll let you swing at this, and I'll put my own question on top of it. Do you think media outlets should show the daily presidential press conferences? I've seen a few requests out there asking media outlets to stop showing them for various reasons. What do you think about that? Should the press cover the live, the briefings coming out of the White House briefing room every day?
So I've gone back and forth with this with a lot of my journalist friends, and I absolutely think that the media should cover these events. But you know, reporters and editors make decisions on what to report, you know, almost minute by minute, and so the real question is, should you cover it live? I mean, obviously you're going to cover it. Also, the norm has been before President Trump is that when the president had something to say, it was really, really important, and you really wanted to pay attention to it. Because President Trump tweets all the time and is on television all the time, not everything he says objectively can be deemed important, sort of presidentially important, if you will. A lot of it is just his campaign rhetoric and those kinds of things. So, you know, they don't cover the rallies live anymore. So when it comes to these briefings, absolutely, I agree that they should be covered. But I think an editorial decision should be made almost on as a case-by-case basis, that what we will show our viewers and the newspapers are able to do it because they aren't necessarily show the video, but the television networks, I think, can find the sound bites, find the quotes, find the things that are the most important from that briefing and show that rather than showing the entire briefing, because the entire briefing is not necessarily news. It's not just news because he's there. I think because of the way he has acted in the last 3 years in his presidency, he has lost the credibility of the mere fact that he says something is makes it important. It's not always important, at least in my mind and in my view. I think most people in the media think that it should be covered live, but what I say is that the editorial judgment must be there for absolutely everything, and that includes whether or not you cover something live, which means that you cover all of it. If you think media doesn't cover anything, they don't report anything, all of anything. So why would they feel compelled to cover all of this? The New York Times doesn't cover all of everything that goes on. They cover some of it. So that's a journalistic norm. So what's so wrong with just covering part of it instead of being forced to cover all of it? Frankly, why do the cable networks do it? Because they're on 24 hours a day. They got to cover stuff. That's why they do it.
Yeah, as someone who used to work at CNN, I can tell you many years ago, I remember having a boss come through, president of CNN, just telling us if we just keep viewers on for an extra 2 minutes each hour, 2 more minutes an hour before they tuned off to go to ESPN or the Home Shopping Network or whatever, we would make a lot of money. That is not why most journalists do their jobs, but it is very much a part of how most big media companies are now a cost center for an even bigger company out there. So for instance, CNN, as you well know, is owned by Time Warner, and Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch's firm. And so they have a shareholder responsibility. So actually it's good business, frankly. It may not be good for America or good for democracy or good for our health and safety at the moment, but it is good for the bottom line. Last question, George, I'm going to actually take the privilege, if you don't mind, If you were president right now, I'll put you on the spot. If you were in charge, what would you be doing in terms of getting news and information out? If you were in charge, what would you do?
You're talking about COVID-19?
Yes, about COVID-19. So the pandemic is broken, whatever date you want to choose, you're the president, what would you do?
So let me think. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. I think the first thing that I would do and what I would prioritize is having experts out in front to explain to the public what's happening, why it's happening. And then my role as president would be to show how we are supporting the fight to solve the problems that the experts have just outlined. So it would be a leadership role in this sense. There would be I would articulate an overall strategy, goals and milestones that we hope to reach, to explain that because it's a virus, we may not reach them because it's hard to predict. But it's basically to be completely honest about what we face and how difficult it will be to challenge this thing that's only got four pieces of DNA in it, but to show the American people and frankly the world that we've got the resources to do it, and given our history, we've got the will to do it as well. That's not happy talk, because in doing that, you have to be honest that, while we've got all these things over here, we've got some gaps. Well, what's the plan to fill those gaps? Because that's frankly what people want. All right, if there are problems, what's your strategy to address those problems, and what are the first timetables on being able to do it? So I would approach it that way. It is a way that not all administrations, whether it's polio or HIV or all the rest, not all administrations, or even the early swine flu, the Obama administration didn't do a terrific job about explaining what it was and how they were going to fight it. It took them about a year to sort of get around to it. But ultimately, all these public health emergencies, ultimately, this is the way they have been led by various administrations, because frankly, the presidents and the folks who advise them realize that this is the only way you can be successful.
Gotcha. And with that, we're going to leave it there. Tristan, if you'll take us to the last slide. We're going to be back, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you so much. I think on behalf of everybody who joined us, George, just so grateful for your wisdom. You can find George. I think this is true. You're on Twitter, right? So if folks, I don't think we put your handle up there, but George, what's your Twitter handle for anybody?
It's at G Strait. At G-S-T-R-A-I-T. I got it before George Strait, the singer, the country singer, got his.
And let me tell you, in the Strait family, there is a lot of razzing about the fact that there's a country singer named George Strait, but we'll save that for another time or off camera. So if you'd like to get in touch with George at G Strait, I'm sure George, you'd be happy to take questions from people if and as they have them. Mm-hmm. Okay. Everybody, we're going to be back next Wednesday with Dr. Richard Wenzel. He was with us about 2 weeks ago. He's the infectious disease doctor and epidemiologist down in Richmond. He's going to give us an update on where he sees things progressing. Just some good scientific information. We're going to hand the microphone to a doctor. Imagine that. If you would like to join us, we'd be happy to have you. In the meantime, I guess a day or two ago, we created a new network listserv that's open and available to everyone. So if you would like, it's check your email, either from me or from the network, and you'll see an invitation to join the COM network listserv. The aim here is just if you have a question or you have some information you'd like to share with folks, it's a great place to do it. That way we can all get smarter and a little bit better, and that's how networks work, with people are sharing and contributing and offering help to one another. So with that, I wish you all a safe and happy weekend. Unfortunately, I think the days ahead are going to be tough. If it feels like it's been rough so far, from every doctor, and George, I think you'd probably second this, the worst is sort of still ahead of us. Is that correct, George?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's too bad, but it's true.
Okay, so hang in there, everybody. Be well. Give a love and hug to your families and loved ones. And if you're thinking about checking in with somebody, you're wondering how they're doing, my advice to you would be just check in. Send them a note. How are you? Give them an email, a phone call, a text, whatever it is. Just see how they're doing. Because tomorrow, every one of us, as we all know, there will be a day without a tomorrow. And for a lot of us over the next couple of weeks, that may be someone that we know and love. So please do reach out and show a little bit of kindness and grace and generosity. With that, we'll let you go. Be well, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. And again, George, thank you so much. Incredibly kind of you to be with us. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.